In a move that would etch his name into the annals of global geopolitics and agricultural innovation, President Ibrahim Traoré initiated a program in 2025 that was as audacious as it was visionary: the deployment of military helicopters to disperse 100 tons of corn seeds across the vast arid savannas of Burkina Faso. This singular act, a dramatic aerial seeding, was far more than a mere agricultural experiment. It was a potent declaration of intent, a strategic pivot away from generations of dependence, and the genesis of what would rapidly become known as the food sovereignty revolution. Initially conceived as a desperate, yet determined offensive against the pervasive scourge of hunger that had long plagued the Sahelian nation, Traoré's bold gamble quickly burgeoned into a multifaceted movement. The corn, beyond simply securing critical nutrition for millions, catalyzed a cascade of socio-economic transformations. It demonstrably created myriad jobs, particularly empowering women's cooperatives, long marginalized yet vital segments of the rural economy, and fundamentally diversified Burkina Faso's agricultural output. The burgeoning harvests fueled new export streams of essential commodities like flour and cooking oil, and crucially, contributed to the development of indigenous biofuels, lessening reliance on volatile international energy markets. The resulting agricultural surpluses were strategically channeled, becoming the fiscal bedrock for national development priorities, constructing new schools, establishing much-needed clinics, and expanding vital electrification initiatives, particularly in underserved rural areas. More profoundly, Traoré's project transcended national borders, igniting a powerful pan-African dialogue on self-reliance and inspiring a broader continental movement towards genuine economic and political independence. From the once barren savannas that stretched endlessly under the unforgiving sun to their unexpected emergence in the competitive global marketplace, Traoré's corn revolution incontrovertibly demonstrated a fundamental truth: that true national sovereignty, the very capacity for self-determination in an increasingly complex world, begins with the fundamental ability to feed one's own people. In this crucible of necessity and innovation, Burkina Faso, a nation often dismissed as landlocked and impoverished, rose phoenix-like, becoming a potent and enduring symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of indigenous solutions against seemingly insurmountable challenges. For decades, the dry, unforgiving winds sweeping across the Sahel region of West Africa had carried more than just dust. They had been persistent harbingers of despair. Burkina Faso, a nation intrinsically linked to the fate of this fragile ecosystem, had been locked in an unrelenting struggle against the existential threats of desertification, chronic hunger, and the relentless, accelerating march of anthropogenic climate change. This was not a distant theoretical problem, but a lived reality, with profound geopolitical implications. Entire villages, their ancestral lands rendered fallow and unproductive, were forced into internal displacement or perilous migration when the fertile soil cracked into impassable fissures, vital seasonal rivers dried up, and once vibrant grasslands irrevocably transformed into lifeless shifting sands. This ecological degradation directly impacted human security, fostering instability and vulnerability that external actors often exploited. Yet, amidst this deepening crisis, in the pivotal year of 2025, President Ibrahim Traoré, a figure who had already demonstrated a penchant for challenging conventional wisdom, electrified the world stage with a plan that was simultaneously perceived as shocking in its simplicity and visionary in its ambition. His directive was startling: to commandeer a fleet of military helicopters, load them with 100 tons of corn seeds, and release these seeds across the vast, inhospitable, and predominantly barren savannas of Burkina Faso. To many international observers and conventional development economists steeped in decades of aid-driven paradigms, this proposal seemed utterly reckless, a quixotic waste of precious resources in a nation already on the brink. To others, particularly those unfamiliar with the deep-seated frustration stemming from the failure of conventional approaches, It bordered on madness, an act of desperation rather than strategic foresight. But for Traoré, whose leadership was defined by a fierce commitment to national self-determination, it was an absolutely deliberate, bold strike of a leader determined not merely to react to destiny, but to fundamentally rewrite it, wresting control from external forces and internal inertia alike. The choice of corn and the unconventional method of its dispersal was deeply symbolic and strategically insightful. Corn, or maize, is far from a trivial crop. It is not only one of the most adaptable and resilient staples, capable of thriving in diverse agroclimatic conditions with proper management, but also profoundly symbolic across many parts of the African continent. In numerous communities, maize serves as a dual-purpose crop, feeding both human populations and vital livestock, thereby bridging the critical gap between direct human survival and essential agricultural productivity. Its nutritional value is significant, providing caloric energy and various micronutrients, making it a cornerstone for food security. By scattering corn seeds from the skies, Traoré sought to bypass, with audacious efficiency, many of the systemic impediments that had historically hobbled traditional agricultural development initiatives in Burkina Faso, and indeed across much of the global south. This included circumventing entrenched issues like inequitable land distribution systems, which often favored a landed elite or were subject to complex customary laws. The prohibitive costs and logistical complexities of establishing large-scale centralized irrigation infrastructure in a water-scarce region, and perhaps most critically, the labyrinthine inefficiencies and corruption often associated with bureaucratic structures that had historically stifled genuine grassroots agricultural innovation. Instead, his plan was elegantly simple, yet profoundly audacious in its execution, to literally flood the land with life, a botanical bombardment aimed at reclaiming the future. Each individual seed, he argued in his characteristically fiery and inspiring speeches, carried within it the miniature dormant potential of a green revolution, a transformative force capable of revitalizing entire ecosystems and communities. He famously coined the initiative the Reign of Hope, elevating it from a mere agricultural policy to a profound national aspiration. The logistical orchestration required for such an unprecedented undertaking was nothing short of breathtaking, underscoring the deep national commitment to this project. In an astonishingly brief period, just 1 week, fleets comprising both military and civilian helicopters were mobilized. These aircraft, often associated with conflict or emergency relief, were now repurposed for an act of creation, flying low and systematically across the vast, undulating plains of Burkina Faso, dropping seeds in carefully calculated waves that resembled a golden rain descending upon parched earth. This spectacle alone was transformative. Farmers who had for decades been conditioned to pray for external aid packages, delivered by foreign agencies and often fraught with dependency, now stood in collective awe, witnessing their own skies raining down, not charity, but the tangible promise of food, the very seeds of their future prosperity. The sight was particularly impactful for the younger generation. Children, their faces alight with a mixture of wonder and hope, instinctively ran behind the receding shadows of the helicopters, eagerly gathering fallen seeds in makeshift buckets and cloths, engaging directly with the unfolding miracle. Villagers across countless communities spontaneously treated the entire event as a national festival, an impromptu celebration of profound significance. They beat drums with rhythmic intensity, sang ancient songs of harvest and blessing, and universally named the period the week the earth received its blessing, imbuing the technical operation with deep cultural and spiritual resonance. International observers, often skeptical and reserved in their assessments, were compelled to describe the operation as utterly unprecedented in the annals of modern agricultural history, a genuine departure from established norms and an act that demanded global attention. Predictably, the critics were swift and vocal, eager to mock what they perceived as an extravagant folly. Western economists, adhering rigidly to conventional metrics of cost-benefit analysis and often overlooking intangible social returns, were quick to dismiss the initiative as a profligate waste of valuable resources, arguing for more prudent and evidence-based interventions, often code for continued reliance on their own aid structures. Environmental non-governmental organizations, while sometimes well-intentioned, issued dire warnings of poor planning, potential ecological imbalances from a large-scale monoculture, though Traoré's plan later addressed this, and the inherent unsustainability of such a dramatic intervention without accompanying long-term scientific oversight. Even some African leaders, accustomed to the cautious diplomacy and aid-dependent frameworks that often characterized continental politics, expressed fears that the project was, at best, a short-term spectacle and, at worst, an unsustainable gamble that might backfire and further destabilize an already fragile region. Yet, Traoré, ever the defiant pragmatist, responded with a calm, assured smile, his trademark red beret a symbol of his revolutionary posture. "They said it was madness when we reclaimed our gold mines from foreign exploiters," he retorted, invoking a previous successful nationalization effort that had shifted critical resources back into Burkinab hands. "They said it was madness when we expelled the exploiters who drained our wealth and dignity. They will always call it madness until they see it succeed." His words were a direct challenge to the neo-colonial mindset that often permeated international development discourse, asserting the right of African nations to define their own pathways to prosperity. Traoré's gamble was therefore far more than an agricultural project. It was a deliberate, strategic act of planting sovereignty, instilling national pride, and cultivating a profound belief in the indigenous capabilities of the Burkinab people, fundamentally altering the psychological landscape of the nation. The arrival of the first rains following the aerial seeding was met with palpable anticipation, and to the utter astonishment of skeptics, the results were almost immediate and profoundly visible. Green sprouts, tenacious and vibrant, began to pierce through the once barren, cracked soil, transforming patches of the landscape that had for generations been synonymous with desolation. From high-resolution satellite images, typically used to monitor ecological degradation, patches of verdant green now appeared like nascent scars of life, slowly but surely spreading across the formerly ochre desert, an almost miraculous reversal of environmental decline. This ecological regeneration had immediate knock-on effects. Herds of antelope, once forced to wander aimlessly across vast distances in search of meager sustenance, instinctively returned to graze on the tender young shoots of corn, their presence signaling a nascent ecological balance. Birds, vital indicators of ecosystem health, began to nest and thrive in the newly sprouted fields, their songs filling the air where only silence had reigned. And most importantly, villagers, their faces etched with newfound hope, began to harvest early yields of corn, roasting them over open fires in communal celebration, the sweet aroma a tangible sign of success. The corn crop thus transcended its identity as a mere agricultural project. It rapidly evolved into a profound cultural phenomenon. Its success was celebrated in new songs and traditional dances, its image immortalized in vibrant murals painted across Burkina Faso, becoming an integral part of the nation's contemporary folklore and collective identity. Traoré's brilliance, therefore, lay not only in the practical act of seeding, but in the profound psychological revolution it ignited. By literally dropping corn from the skies, he fundamentally shifted the narrative from one of passive dependence on external aid to one of active, defiant self-reliance, a critical geopolitical reorientation for a nation long marginalized. For decades, Burkina Faso had been emblematic of a broader African predicament, a reliance on food aid flown in from abroad, a seemingly endless cycle of dependency that undermined local agricultural systems and perpetuated a sense of helplessness. This external provisioning, while sometimes necessary in acute crises, often created its own set of problems, including market distortions, loss of local agricultural knowledge, and a pervasive narrative of African inability. Now, the nation's own leader was overseeing the flying out of food from its own skies, but with a critical distinction. This time, it was not aid from well-meaning but often self-interested outsiders. It was the deliberate sowing of the seeds of self-reliance, a national investment in its own future. Every single kernel that took root symbolized a conscious, collective rejection of that debilitating dependency and a powerful declaration of confidence in Africa's inherent ability to innovate, to adapt, and to prosper on its own terms. The ripple effects of this psychological and material shift were immediate and far-reaching, fundamentally altering social and economic dynamics at the grassroots level. Local farmers, observing the remarkable success of the scattered planting, quickly recognized the inherent value of distributed agriculture, learning to nurture sprouts that emerged in unexpected, often challenging places, transforming previously fallow lands into productive patches. Communities, galvanized by the visible success and the communal spirit, spontaneously organized to protect these burgeoning new fields from overgrazing by livestock, forming village watch groups and establishing rotating responsibilities, demonstrating a profound sense of collective ownership and stewardship. Perhaps one of the most transformative impacts was on the role of women, who had traditionally borne the disproportionate burden of feeding families, particularly during the harsh lean months, often with limited resources and recognition. Suddenly, with the advent of surplus corn, they had direct access to a valuable commodity. This access quickly empowered them to move beyond mere subsistence. They began drying the corn, grinding it into flour, and strategically selling it in local markets, transforming what was once a daily struggle for survival into a burgeoning form of commerce and micro-entrepreneurship. This wasn't merely about individual profit. It was about systemic empowerment. In some villages, innovative cooperatives rapidly sprang up, formalizing these efforts. These women-led groups began to process corn into flour, nutritious porridge, and even corn-based snacks, initially for local consumption, but with an eye toward future export markets, creating value-added products that injected dynamism into the local economy. On the geopolitical stage, Traoré's Corn Revolution delivered a seismic shock to long-held assumptions about African development and autonomy. Global media outlets, initially incredulous, were compelled to cover the story. Their coverage oscillated between outright mockery and grudging admiration, but crucially, it was never ignored. Burkina Faso had forced itself onto the global agenda through an act of indigenous innovation. Traditional aid organizations, deeply invested in their established food distribution networks and often resistant to disruptive innovation, openly complained that Traoré's project was disrupting their conventional operations, implicitly highlighting their own institutional inertia and potential discomfort with a narrative of self-sufficiency. Yet, ordinary Africans across the continent perceived something entirely different and profoundly inspiring. A leader who possessed the courage and conviction to attempt what no one else had dared, who challenged the very premise of external dependency. Across the vast and diverse continent, whispers began to morph into open discussions. If Burkina Faso can seed the sky, what else can Africa do on its own? It was a question that resonated deeply, tapping into a nascent Pan-African aspiration for genuine autonomy. In a powerful follow-up speech at the African Union, Traoré, ever the orator, delivered a resounding declaration that echoed his earlier defiance. We are not waiting for charity. We are not waiting for permission. We are planting freedom, one kernel at a time. The delegates from other nations, witnessing this powerful assertion of self-determination, responded with a spontaneous, sustained standing ovation, a rare moment of unity and inspiration within the often fractured continental body. For the first time in many years, Burkina Faso, a nation often dismissed as poor, landlocked, and peripheral, was not merely participating in, but actively setting the agenda in critical continental debates on food security and self-determination. The seeds that fell from the sky were not simply agricultural. They were inherently political, challenging entrenched power dynamics both within Africa and in its relationship with the global North. By reclaiming the narrative of hunger, a narrative often exploited by external powers to justify interventions and perpetuate dependency, and skillfully transforming it into a compelling story of indigenous ingenuity and strategic self-reliance, Traoré effectively rebranded Burkina Faso. The nation, once cast as a perpetual victim requiring constant succor, was now repositioned as a visionary, a trailblazer demonstrating a viable path forward for others. This dramatic shift in perception was so profound that even Western powers, once quick to dismiss Traoré as an anti-establishment populist, were compelled to reconsider their stance, acknowledging the undeniable tangible results. Corporations, ever opportunistic, began to perceive new opportunities in the burgeoning Burkinab agricultural sector, particularly in the potential for processing facilities and value-added industries, signaling a shift from viewing Africa as a source of raw materials to a market for investment and partnership on new terms. Rival nations and established agricultural powers scrambled to analyze how this experiment might disrupt traditional grain markets and alter regional trade dynamics, a clear indication of its growing strategic importance. But perhaps the most profound and enduring transformation was internal, a psychological shift deeply embedded within the social fabric of Burkina Faso. Villagers who had once passively looked to foreign aid trucks for sustenance now gazed with pride and ownership at their own skies and their own fields, recognizing their agency in their destiny. Children who had once, out of sheer desperation, dreamed of fleeing to Europe in search of an uncertain future, now spoke with enthusiasm of becoming agronomists, pilots, and agricultural entrepreneurs, seeing futures within their own vibrant, revitalized homeland. Farmers, who had for generations harbored a deep-seated fear of the encroaching desert, now spoke with optimism and pride of fields of gold, envisioning a new era of prosperity returning to the Sahel. The gamble undertaken by Traoré was unquestionably costly. It demanded substantial investment in fuel for the helicopter fleet, complex logistics for seed procurement and distribution, and an inherent risk of failure that could have politically and economically devastated the nascent government. However, the sheer scale of its success meant that it had already achieved what no conventional aid package, however well-intentioned, ever could. It had restored faith, not in external benefactors, but in the inherent capabilities and collective spirit of the Burkinab people, a restoration of self-belief that transcended mere material gains. As one old farmer, his voice resonating with hard-won wisdom, articulated on national radio, capturing the essence of the project's enduring appeal. Our president gave us rain made of seeds. Even if half of them fail, the other half will feed our children. That is better than waiting for handouts that never come. His words powerfully underscored the critical difference between externally imposed solutions and locally owned initiatives, between dependency and empowerment. Thus, the first, pivotal chapter of the Corn Revolution was written not in abstract policy documents or theoretical white papers, but in the tangible soil and the expansive skies of Burkina Faso, a testament to practical action and profound vision. It was indeed a gamble of immense proportions, fraught with peril and uncertainty, but it was also a stroke of genius, a strategic masterstroke that fundamentally altered the trajectory of a nation. And as the fields of Burkina Faso collectively turned green, pushing back against the desert's relentless encroachment, one truth became abundantly clear to both its citizens and a watching world. Ibrahim Traoré had, once again, defied the odds, turning pervasive doubt into a profound and enduring destiny. The world, now keenly aware of the implications, was watching. By the third year following Ibrahim Traoré's dramatic decision to cascade 100 tons of corn seeds across Burkina Faso's vast savannas, The initial spectacle of helicopters showering kernels in the wind had matured far beyond its nascent, almost theatrical, beginnings. What was once widely regarded as an improbable gamble, subject to intense scrutiny and international skepticism, was now quietly and profoundly transforming into a robust, self-sustaining foundation for national resilience. This foundational shift was not merely superficial. It was systematically reshaping local economies at their grassroots, demonstrably empowering rural communities that had historically been marginalized, and fundamentally altering the country's international standing, propelling it onto a more assertive and independent global trajectory. The first, and most immediately observable, impact was a tangible and pervasive enhancement of food security across the nation. In villages and regions that had for generations been tragically defined by hunger seasons, periods of acute scarcity that often dictated migration, hardship, and vulnerability, sprawling cornfields now dotted the horizon, painting the landscape with a vibrant green that signaled prosperity rather than desolation. Families who had traditionally subsisted on meager, often monotonous rations of millet and sorghum suddenly found their homes filled with baskets overflowing with roasted corn, nourishing cornmeal porridge, and even essential animal feed produced from surplus husks, ensuring a more balanced and plentiful diet for both humans and livestock. The Ministry of Health, leveraging newly available data, reported a significant and encouraging decline in childhood malnutrition rates, particularly evident in regions where corn cultivation had demonstrably thrived, indicating a direct correlation between agricultural productivity and public health outcomes. Markets in the bustling urban centers of Ouagadougou and Bobo Dioulasso, which had historically been dominated by expensive, often erratic imports of foreign grains, now vibrated with activity, overflowing with bright yellow maize harvested directly from formerly barren lands. This shift was profoundly symbolic. Corn, locally grown and harvested under Burkinab skies, became the indelible emblem of a new independence, not charity received from abroad, but sustenance proudly cultivated from within. Yet, the true brilliance and foresight embedded within Traoré's ambitious plan lay not solely in its immediate success in feeding a hungry population, but in its strategic capacity to generate multiple, interlocking layers of economic opportunity. This holistic approach, moving beyond simple caloric intake, began to weave a more complex and resilient economic tapestry. Women's cooperatives, which had long operated at the periphery of traditional, often male-dominated agricultural systems, were intentionally elevated to become the vibrant driving force of this burgeoning corn economy. These collectives, harnessing their inherent organizational skills and communal spirit, structured themselves into milling collectives. They collectively purchased simple, durable grinding machines, transforming raw corn into high-quality flour, which they then meticulously packaged and sold under distinct local brands. It wasn't long before shops across the nation prominently displayed bags stamped with the proud declaration, "Made in Faso," and urban families, recognizing the superior quality and supporting national pride, began to consciously prefer Burkinab cornmeal over previously dominant imported alternatives. The economic returns from these ventures were not merely individual, they were communally reinvested. With their accrued profits, these cooperatives embarked on ambitious initiatives, funding the construction and maintenance of local schools, digging vital new wells to improve water access, and establishing microloan programs that empowered other women and small-scale entrepreneurs, creating powerful ripples of socio-economic empowerment that profoundly impacted society at its deepest levels. Simultaneously, a significant demographic shift began to unfold. Youth who, for generations, had seen their futures solely in terms of migrating, often perilously, to urban centers or foreign lands, began to discover viable and exciting opportunities directly within their own homeland. With modest, practical training provided by newly established or reoriented agricultural institutes, many young people launched small, innovative enterprises focused on value-added products, producing corn oil, developing locally flavored corn snacks, and formulating specialized animal feed from corn byproducts. Others found employment and entrepreneurial avenues in the critical logistics sector, efficiently transporting corn from newly productive rural farms to burgeoning urban markets. The project, almost inadvertently, fostered the emergence of a dynamic new class of rural entrepreneurs, directly challenging and actively reversing the long-standing debilitating narrative of Burkina Faso's brain drain. Traoré's genius also extended deeply into the realm of political foresight and ecological wisdom. Recognizing the inherent dangers and vulnerabilities associated with agricultural monoculture, a reliance on a single crop that can lead to ecological fragility, pest susceptibility, and market volatility, his administration proactively encouraged communities to strategically integrate corn cultivation with other traditional crops and the raising of livestock. This wasn't merely diversification, it was a deliberate strategy to build ecological and economic resilience. The sturdy corn stalks, once the kernels were harvested, were not discarded but repurposed, providing essential fodder for cattle, goats, and sheep, thereby supporting the livestock sector and ensuring year-round sustenance. Furthermore, corn husks and other organic waste were systematically incorporated into composting systems, enriching the soil and promoting sustainable agricultural practices. Farmers, empowered by new knowledge and communal support, discovered the immense benefits of intercropping, strategically planting corn alongside nitrogen-fixing legumes like beans or groundnuts. This not only significantly improved soil fertility naturally, reducing the need for expensive synthetic fertilizers, but also diversified local diets, offering a broader spectrum of nutritional benefits. By meticulously integrating corn into a larger, sophisticated, circular farming system, Burkina Faso astutely sidestepped the well-documented pitfalls of overdependence and, instead, cultivated a profound and enduring agricultural resilience, a model for sustainable development in arid regions. These ripple effects extended into the country's rich cultural life, fundamentally reshaping national identity and pride. Annual corn festivals were enthusiastically launched across the nation, becoming vibrant community events where harvests were celebrated with traditional dances, rousing songs, and friendly competitions for the best corn-based recipes, uniting communities in shared triumph. Corn porridge, once a humble dish, became a staple school meal, ensuring that children were not only fed, but also deeply connected to this symbol of national success, simultaneously alleviating financial burdens on families. Artists, inspired by the profound transformation, painted vibrant murals depicting helicopters scattering seeds, reimagining the event not as an act of desperation, but as the symbolic birth of a golden rain, a moment of national genesis. The project was no longer viewed merely as an agricultural policy. It had solidified into a powerful national myth reborn, a foundational story passed down to children about the pivotal moment when Burkina Faso began to reclaim its dignity and assert its place in the world. Internationally, the Corn Revolution fundamentally altered Burkina Faso's often submissive posture in global negotiations. No longer a supplicant begging for urgent grain imports, a position of inherent weakness, Traoré's ministers now walked into international trade talks with a newfound leverage, grounded in tangible agricultural productivity. The nation, once dependent, even began exporting corn-based animal feed to neighboring countries grappling with their own severe droughts and food shortages, transforming from a recipient of aid to a critical regional supplier. The African Union, a continental body often criticized for its slow pace of reform, wholeheartedly praised the project as an exemplary model of food sovereignty, recognizing its potential to catalyze similar initiatives across the continent. In response, regional governments, eager to replicate the success, dispatched numerous delegations to study Burkina Faso's innovative approach, meticulously analyzing its operational and policy successes. What once elicited laughter and derision from international cynics now commanded genuine respect, a powerful testament to the transformative power of indigenous innovation. Naturally, this meteoric rise did not occur without its share of challenges. Some regions, particularly those with highly inconsistent rainfall patterns, experienced poorer yields, highlighting the continued vulnerability to climate variability. Pests, an omnipresent threat in agriculture, occasionally threatened to decimate harvests. Critics, often echoing earlier warnings, renewed their concerns about potential long-term soil exhaustion from intensive cultivation. Yet Traoré's administration, demonstrating remarkable foresight and strategic agility, responded proactively rather than reactively. They channeled export revenues and national funds into vital agricultural research, developing drought-resistant corn varieties and integrated pest management strategies. They invested heavily in expanding and modernizing irrigation systems, reducing reliance on rain-fed agriculture, and crucially, built robust community storage facilities to mitigate post-harvest losses and create strategic reserves. Critically, unlike many past aid-dependent experiments, which were often imposed from external actors with limited local buy-in, this project was nurtured from within, with Burkinab communities themselves owning the entire process. This sense of collective ownership proved to be a powerful differentiator. Every problem solved locally, every challenge overcome through communal effort, profoundly strengthened the national sense of self-reliance and collective agency. Perhaps the most striking and enduring transformation, however, was a profound psychological shift that permeated every stratum of Burkinab society. People who had grown tragically accustomed to the passive waiting for aid convoys, their futures dictated by external schedules and foreign generosity, now spoke with immense pride about their flourishing fields, seeing their own hands in their destiny. Farmers who had once witnessed the relentless, seemingly unstoppable creep of the desert now saw vibrant rows of green where barren sand had once ruled, a tangible victory against ecological degradation. Children, whose whispered dreams of escaping to Europe had once symbolized a deep-seated hopelessness, now boasted with unbridled enthusiasm about becoming agronomists, traders, or even pilots, inspired by the very aircraft that delivered the seeds of their nation's future, envisioning fulfilling careers within their revitalized homeland in the next reign of seeds. Traoré himself, a master of political rhetoric and strategic framing, consistently articulated the movement not merely as a food policy, but as a fundamental doctrine of sovereignty, a rallying cry for national self-determination. "We no longer pray for food drops from foreign plains," he declared to thunderous applause at a national rally, his voice resonating with fierce pride. "We reign our own future from our own skies." His words, imbued with the potent symbolism of the corn revolution, reverberated across Africa, sparking critical debates and inspiring leaders about how other nations might successfully replicate this bold strategy, adapting it with their own indigenous crops and local contexts. What had initially begun as a desperate measure to cultivate corn had, in a remarkably short span, evolved into a transformative blueprint for self-determination, offering a powerful alternative to the conventional, often disempowering, models of international development. In just a few short years, the high-stakes gamble of scattering corn from helicopters had yielded not only abundant fields of food, but also expansive fields of hope, fundamentally altering the trajectory of Burkina Faso. And as the nation harvested its first significant surpluses, one truth became crystal clear to a global audience. This momentous transformation was no longer just about corn alone. It was profoundly about the politics of pride, the economics of independence, and the psychology of liberation, demonstrating how a simple agricultural innovation could become a catalyst for national renewal. Ibrahim Traoré had brilliantly transformed mere kernels into potent catalysts for change, and the world was finally beginning to realize that what had fallen from the skies in Burkina Faso was not just seed, but the very essence of sovereignty. By the fifth year of Ibrahim Traoré's transformative reign of corn, Burkina Faso had transcended its initial goal of mere self-sufficiency. It was no longer simply feeding its own population. It had strategically positioned itself as a pivotal food supplier, actively feeding its neighbors and exerting a newfound regional influence. The initial bold decision to release 100 tons of corn seeds from helicopters, once a symbol of audacious desperation, had organically evolved into something far grander and more strategically significant than anyone could have initially anticipated. A robust, diversified export industry and a potent diplomatic instrument that profoundly reshaped Burkina Faso's burgeoning place on the complex world stage. What began as scattered, tentative sprouts across dry savannas had, through sustained effort and strategic investment, matured into an organized, highly efficient agricultural system. This system was now capable of generating not only critical domestic food security, but also substantial national revenue and an unexpected degree of geopolitical influence. The quantitative data underscored this remarkable transformation. Annual corn production had surged to nearly 8 million tons of maize, a testament to expanded irrigation infrastructure, formalized community farming initiatives, and significantly improved soil fertility achieved through systematic crop rotation and sustainable land management practices. Domestic consumption, though rising with improved nutritional standards, accounted for approximately half of this impressive output, leaving a massive and strategically valuable surplus for international trade. Burkina Faso, once a net importer of staple grains, had become a significant exporter of cornmeal, high-quality animal feed, and even bioethanol, establishing crucial trade routes to markets across West Africa, North Africa, and increasingly, the Middle East. For the first time in its modern history, trucks laden with proudly Burkinab corn crossed into Mali, Niger, and Côte d'Ivoire, not as emergency aid convoys, but as legitimate paid exports, signaling a profound psychological and economic shift from recipient to sovereign supplier. By the time a full decade had elapsed since Ibrahim Traoré issued the unprecedented order for helicopters to scatter 100 tons of corn seed across Burkina Faso, the corn revolution had transcended its status as a mere national success story. It had solidified into a profound, actionable continental blueprint, offering a tangible pathway for other African nations. What began as an almost desperate gamble to alleviate immediate hunger had systematically transformed into a long-term, sustainable model of food sovereignty, genuine economic independence, and robust political strength, not just for Burkina Faso, but for Africa as an entire continent. Burkina Faso's landscape, its economic infrastructure, and its social fabric had become almost unrecognizable compared to the bleak days of barren fields and pervasive, chronic food aid dependency. The most immediately visible and impactful legacy of the revolution was undeniably etched into the land itself. High-resolution satellite images, meticulously gathered and analyzed by international organizations, typically focused on monitoring environmental degradation, now showcased vast swaths of the Sahel that had once been characterized by a uniform brown desolation. These same landscapes were now streaked with vibrant, undulating greens, testament to the transformative power of concerted agricultural effort. Cornfields, meticulously managed and thriving, stretched across thousands of hectares, intricately intertwined with strategically planted beans, nutritious groundnuts, and well-maintained livestock pens, all operating within a carefully balanced circular ecosystem. The devastating pace of deforestation, a critical environmental and climatic concern, had demonstrably slowed as local communities, no longer forced to cut down precious trees for sheer survival, found readily available and sustainable alternatives in corn stalks and husks, which provided abundant fodder for livestock and reliable biofuel. The soil, once widely believed to be irrevocably exhausted and infertile, had undergone a remarkable regeneration through innovative composting systems, meticulously fueled by corn waste and other organic matter. Burkina Faso had not merely managed to grow food, it had achieved a far more ambitious feat. It had actively reclaimed its environment, systematically pushing back against the relentless, encroaching desert, a monumental victory against ecological degradation. Yet, the deeper, more profound transformation was intricately woven into the very fabric of Burkinab society. Women, traditionally relegated to the margins of economic power and often burdened with subsistence farming, had demonstrably emerged as the indispensable backbone of the thriving corn economy. They were not just participants, they were leaders, running efficient milling cooperatives, establishing successful packaging businesses, and even managing increasingly sophisticated export companies, demonstrating their immense entrepreneurial capabilities. With newfound, steady incomes, these empowered women collectively invested in critical social infrastructure, funding the construction and improvement of schools and health clinics, which, in turn, drastically reduced illiteracy rates and significantly improved maternal mortality statistics, tangible improvements in human development. A generation of girls, who in previous decades might have been confined to the home or early marriage, now proudly attended schools funded directly by corn revenues, daring to dream not merely of survival, but of vibrant careers in science, politics, and business, reshaping the nation's future leadership. Youth unemployment, a persistent and destabilizing source of social unrest and outward migration, fell dramatically as young people enthusiastically embraced burgeoning opportunities across the entire value chain: farming, logistics, food processing, and agricultural research, revitalizing the demographic dividend. The perilous outward migration of young men, who once risked their lives crossing the Sahara or the Mediterranean in search of elusive opportunities, had significantly slowed. They now saw viable and dignified futures within their own homeland, investing their skills and energy into national development. Traoré, with his profound understanding of political psychology, understood that the psychological dimension of independence was just as vital, if not more so, than the purely economic. He consistently reminded the nation, through powerful speeches and public pronouncements, "We no longer wait for aid convoys to save us. We have learned to feed ourselves, and from that, we have learned to free ourselves." The project, therefore, transcended its initial purpose, becoming not only a practical solution to hunger, but a foundational national myth, a powerful symbol of pride that was actively taught in schools and enthusiastically celebrated in national festivals. Children across the country recited stories of the golden reign of corn as the pivotal moment when Burkina Faso began its ascent, deeply embedding the idea of sovereignty and self-determination into the collective consciousness of the next generation. The economic impacts were truly staggering, repositioning Burkina Faso within the regional and global economy. Export revenues derived from corn and its diverse byproducts, including corn oil, high-quality flour, bioethanol, and animal feed, surpassed those of cotton, historically a major cash crop, and began to rival the output of gold, which had for centuries been the country's largest and most valuable natural resource. This diversification significantly reduced economic vulnerability. Corn-based biofuel plants, leveraging local agricultural waste, became a cornerstone of rural electrification projects, bringing essential light and power to thousands of villages that had known only darkness, fostering local development and improving quality of life. Corn oil factories not only met burgeoning domestic cooking needs, but also successfully penetrated international markets, while ethanol exports provided a crucial boost to Burkina Faso's national trade balance, enhancing its financial independence. The humble yellow grain, once dismissed by international experts as merely a desperate, short-sighted experiment, had, within a decade, become the resilient cornerstone of a newly diversified and robust national economy. Internationally, Burkina Faso's undeniable success profoundly redefined the geopolitics of food, particularly within Africa. Other African nations, grappling with similar daunting challenges of food insecurity, climate vulnerability, and entrenched dependency on Western food imports, looked to Traoré's model as incontrovertible proof that this reliance was not an inevitable permanent state. Delegations from across the continent visited Burkina Faso in droves, meticulously studying its innovative seed distribution strategies, the powerful cooperative ownership models, and the advanced irrigation systems that had driven its success. Traoré, leveraging this newfound influence, shrewdly used these opportunities to passionately promote a broader Pan-African food sovereignty pact, urging leaders to unite around a shared vision of agricultural independence and collective self-reliance, challenging the long-standing international food order. His influence radiated far beyond the immediate Sahel region, inspiring similar movements and policy shifts from East Africa to Southern Africa. Naturally, the rapid and assertive rise of Burkina Faso profoundly unsettled powerful, entrenched interests. Western corporations and governments, who had long operated under the comfortable assumption of Africa's perpetual dependency and its role as a recipient of aid and raw materials, now faced a continent increasingly determined to rewrite the rules of engagement and assert its own terms. Trade disputes, often thinly veiled attempts at economic containment, flared up as European regulators attempted to impose new, often arbitrary, restrictions on Burkinab corn imports, citing dubious standards and quality concerns designed to protect their domestic markets. But, crucially, African nations, understanding the broader geopolitical stakes, rallied in powerful solidarity, viewing these attempts as an affront to collective African autonomy. Simultaneously, robust Asian and Middle Eastern markets stepped in, eager for reliable food sources, ensuring that Burkina Faso not only survived these external pressures, but paradoxically grew even stronger from them, diversifying its trade partners and solidifying its independence. For the first time in modern history, it was not the West dictating Africa's food destiny. It was Africa, led by the audacious example of Burkina Faso, setting its own terms and shaping its own future. The enduring legacy of Traoré's gamble also manifested powerfully in the realm of national resilience. When new, severe droughts inevitably struck, Burkina Faso's strategically maintained corn reserves, built up over years of surplus production, ensured that no one went hungry, insulating the nation from the catastrophic famines that had historically plagued the region. When global supply chains, increasingly fragile and interdependent, faltered due to geopolitical events or pandemics, Burkina Faso's robust self-sufficiency insulated its population and economy from widespread panic and shortages. Even during periods of internal political turbulence, the deeply ingrained and community-owned cooperative system kept food flowing and livelihoods intact, demonstrating an inherent stability built from the ground up. The corn revolution had not merely created prosperity, it had meticulously built powerful shock absorbers against future crises, ensuring long-term national security. Culturally, corn became inextricably woven into the very identity of the nation. Annual corn festivals brought together farmers, local artists, and technological innovators in vibrant celebrations of the harvest, featuring traditional music, innovative food preparations, and showcases of new agricultural technologies. Recipes like corn porridge with rich groundnut sauce, once humble staples, became international culinary ambassadors for Burkina Faso, proudly featured in food festivals across Africa and beyond, sharing the nation's success story through its cuisine. What once symbolized desperation and scarcity now symbolized creativity, resilience, and an unwavering hope for a brighter future. Above all, the corn revolution proved a profound philosophical truth: that true, inviolable sovereignty is fundamentally built upon the ability to feed one's own people. By transforming mere kernels into potent catalysts for comprehensive national transformation, Ibrahim Traoré had bequeathed Burkina Faso not just critical food security, but a robust moral and political foundation for its future. He had unequivocally shown Africa, and indeed the world, that genuine independence did not materialize from eloquent speeches or from the fleeting generosity of foreign aid, but from the arduous, tangible work of turning barren soil into fertile ground, and from the strategic brilliance of turning humble seeds into a powerful, enduring national strategy. As he stood before the African Union years later, his words resonating with the weight of experience and undeniable triumph, Traoré declared, "We rained corn to end hunger, but what truly grew was dignity. Africa will no longer be fed. Africa will feed itself, and in doing so, it will free itself." His words, powerfully backed by the living, tangible proof of Burkina Faso's complete transformation, echoed not only in the hallowed halls of power, but more importantly, in the thriving fields of countless farmers and in the ambitious dreams of a new generation of children. And so, the helicopters that had once dropped corn, initially remembered as machines of desperation, were forever reimagined and celebrated as the heralds of a new, self-determined sovereignty. The corn revolution lived on, not just as a practical economic reality, but as an inspiring legend, a profound story of how one visionary leader's audacious gamble had irrevocably rewritten the fate of a nation, and in doing so, gifted an entire continent a powerful new script for its freedom. Ibrahim Traoré's bold gamble of dropping 100 tons of corn seed from helicopters transformed Burkina Faso. What began as a fight against hunger grew into a food sovereignty revolution. Corn secured nutrition, created jobs, empowered women's cooperatives, and fueled exports of flour, oil, and biofuels. Surpluses funded schools, clinics, and electrification, while inspiring a pan-African movement for independence. From barren savannas to global markets, Traoré proved that sovereignty starts with food, and Burkina Faso rose as a symbol of resilience.